Combat within NightReign is a huge step forward from Elden Ring. With this entry, FromSoft includes some of the most impactful changes to the series so far, like character abilities. These new additions solve many of my largest concerns about Elden Ring, which was a lack of fun interactions to deal with how powerful bosses have become. I know the Dark Souls games are meant to feel a bit like you're David taking on Goliath and his dad, but it has sort of morphed into David fighting the God Emperor of the universe and his brother, but at least now you can jump. So to say the least, the gap between player and boss has gotten pretty large, but I'm very glad to say that NightReign finds a much better balance for this feeling, so much so that I've never been more excited for the future of the Souls series. There's a ton of great new mechanics in here that feel like they fit in perfectly with the heart of Souls combat, and I can't wait to see how they build on this successful experiment even further. All that said, slaying demons and whatever else isn't everything there is to playing NightReign. The combat is much improved, but the game holds many flaws elsewhere. It especially struggles in creating a satisfying roguelike gameplay loop. Although I do think there was a lot of potential here, but much of it is wasted, largely due to your most important choices being made in the strangest of locations. But I'll get to all of that a bit later. Instead, first, let's take a closer look at what's new with NightReign's combat. Here's what's changed. They removed character creation in favor of a few classes you can choose from. Each of these come with their own unique set of stats, as well as proficiencies and weapon types that suit them. While creating and building your own character is typically an important part of the Souls series, they've changed it up in NightReign for a good reason. This game is more of a roguelike, where you'll be restarting your adventure each time you play. On top of that, you're also on a pretty strict timer, meaning to get as strong as possible before fighting the final boss, it's important to be efficient, and being forced to make quick decisions around stats and the like doesn't sound very fun. So for now, I think it's fine that they've removed the choice of stats, but I would be a little surprised if the Souls series continues to stray away from the more classless direction they typically go in. I think it's something a lot of people value in these games. That said, NightReign gives me a lot of confidence in From's ability to make interesting archetypes, and I think it could be cool to see them push the fantasy of NightReign's characters even further. Something I imagine won't become permanent, but would prefer if it did, is the removal of weight. In NightReign, each character can hold up to 6 items with no penalty. Normally, holding 6 great swords would make you walk like your grandpa the day after running a marathon. In NightReign, it makes no difference. Not having to worry about equip load feels great, and is also another reason why classes could be a great change to the Souls series. Weight has some pretty hefty consideration when it comes to certain items in these games. For example, you might want to wear stronger armor in order to take less damage, but unless you've invested a ton of points into your endurance stat, you're going to be walking and rolling a lot more slowly. Part of the reason this feels bad is that endurance is a stat that really only increases how much you can carry, which makes it feel pretty horrible to invest into. But if you were to instead have classes in Elden Ring 2 or whatever the next Souls game is, you could give characters proficiencies in wearing specific armor types, kind of like how D&D does it. I imagine this would allow players to equip the weapons and armor they want to without having to think about whether or not they should. The downside with this kind of idea is, of course, it'll probably make it tough to create a character that runs around in Havel armor slinging spells. At the same time, I think that's okay. If that's really something you want to do, it's already ready and waiting for you in the previous 4 games. Moving on, another impactful change in NightReign that has been brought to every character is how fast you can sprint. Pressing L3 on your controller will make you almost as fast as riding Torrent. This uses a ton of stamina, but allows you to get in and out of the action much faster. It also just feels pretty good to use, and it makes running away from attacks not only viable, but something that's required for some. For example, while fighting the night boss Adele, or the Gaping Jaw, there's a moment where they'll begin erupting, eventually unleashing an enormous blast of lightning. This attack, like many others in Elden Ring, has multiple hitboxes while you're within close range, so to avoid it, you'll need to be pretty far from the boss. Luckily, this can be easily done by sprinting away as fast as possible. It didn't take long for me to become a big fan of this super sprint. I feel like it makes the game more dynamic without our character feeling overly powerful, partly because it's well balanced by the amount of stamina that's required to sprint around like a maniac. Plus, it's just fun to do. But coming back to Adele, while I like the idea of this kind of mechanic where you need the super sprint from certain attacks, the execution is still lacking in a few moments. This unfortunately comes down to the same problem that plagues many blast attacks in Elden Ring. There's still not a clear enough indication of how far I need to be from this blast in order to be safe, whether it's the Tree Sentinel Slam, Midra's bomb attacks, or Radahn's self-meteor attack. All of these just give almost no hints as to where is safe and where isn't. And let's be clear, I'm not asking for a giant wall of yellow tape that shows me the exact pixel of where a hitbox ends. I just want some or any kind of hint as to where the hitbox will stop, like maybe a scorched explosion mark on the ground. Finally, maybe my favorite change to the game is that fall damage has been completely taken away. This was an infuriating issue in Elden Ring, where it felt like you could fall 20 feet and take 10% of your HP bar, but if you fell 22 feet, you died. So I'm very glad that they've just removed it completely for NightReign. It makes the verticality of the map feel a lot easier to navigate when you don't have to worry about, will this 10-foot jump kill me or not. But of everything I've mentioned so far, this is what I most expect to return in future games. Being able to simply drop down into a giant ravine takes away from the mystery of how to get down there. It's a really important part of how From typically creates their worlds, because it's fun to get to a cliff and see the landscape from up above and think, yo, that's awesome, how do I get over there? So even though fall damage can often feel terrible, I do think it's very necessary to keep around. As for running around the world of NightReign, the character you choose matters a lot, not only due to the abilities you now have, but mostly because enemy drops are catered towards what your character will prefer to use. For instance, if you choose the mage character or the recluse, she will be more likely to receive stabs as a reward, and when you level up, the stats you get will also make her better at using these items. Lastly, she also has proficiency with incantations and talismans, but these can be a bit tougher to find while playing the recluse as it's not her preferred item. Generally, there's a character with an archetype for almost everyone. The only thing that really seems to be missing from the roster is a sort of paladin-like character that can use melee weapons with faith. But besides that, the more typical classes are here. There's a sort of great axe wielding berserker, a summoner, ranger, rogue, tank, and last but not least, your standard John Dark Souls warrior guy. I think John, better known as the Wilder, is the most fun to play, with the part rogue, part mage character Duchess being a close second. Wilder's main ability is a hookshot that will either grapple a foe towards you, or if they're a bit sturdier, you'll instead hurl yourself towards them. And lastly, if nothing is targeted, you'll just swing forward. This move is a ton of fun with a fairly short cooldown, giving this character a ton of adaptability and movement in battles. Plus, it's just fun to fling around bosses like Spider-Man. The Wilder's ultimate is a blast that shoots a short but wide-ranged cone of fire, dealing a ton of damage and interrupting just about any attack, although there are a few exceptions. But this is probably my favorite thing about many of the ultimates in NightReign. Not only do they give you invincibility frames during their use, but they also serve as an almost guaranteed way to interrupt an enemy's action. I think this is awesome and a very fun thing to play around. This and the hookshot are the exact kind of interactions against enemy attacks I've been wanting to see in the Souls series. I think this gives players just the right amount of tools in order to make the gameplay feel more fun while keeping that power disparity we're used to. But it's not just the Wilder, every character has abilities that are unique and a ton of fun, meaning playing each of them is a totally different experience, and I don't think I can overstate how good I find these changes to be. It makes the combat of Elden Ring feel fresh, new, and enjoyable to experience again. And better yet is that all of these characters feel well balanced. It's pretty impressive how similar the damage between classes seem to be. There's not really any single character that sticks out besides the tank class Guardian, where he seems to be a little on the weak side compared to everyone else damage-wise. But besides that, I don't feel like I noticed any certain character completely outperforming others. But if I had to choose one that stood out a little from the rest, it's probably the Wizard Recluse. Their class ability is fairly complex compared to the rest of the cast, and it's really like a Tenet 1 because what it does is different depending on the scenario. The ability also changes how you play at the same time. It's really cool. For example, she might receive a buff like a lightning dodge or maybe a ball of light that gives your party increased max HP. It might also just do a ton of damage with a fire dot, a blast of magic, and a few others. Here's how it works. Starting out, the ability is fairly simple. Whenever a class of magic is used, such as fire, lightning, holy, or cold, a brightly colored circle will appear on the enemy struck by that element. You can then use your ability to gather that magic and store it in a rune slot of sorts. Doing this also restores a little bit of MP, which feels great as a mage character, and helps to replace the other Estus Flask, which I think is also a great idea. It's kind of outdated. More importantly, after you've stored magic 3 times, filling up your rune slots, you can cast it a final time for a special ability, which will be based upon what magic you have filled your runes with. All in all, this is a great interaction that makes playing mage a ton of fun. I never expected FromSoft to release an interaction that's so complex and cool, because as far as player actions go, they tend to be pretty simple. Most of it is pressing or holding a single button to do a thing, and that's it. Whether it's attacking, casting a spell, dodging, blocking, summoning, using an item, or whatever else. These tend to be fairly simplistic one-to-one actions that don't have a lot of depth to them. So I'm really interested to see how FromSoft might possibly expand this idea to other kinds of archetypes. For example, I can imagine them giving a rogue character something like a secondary dodge, where maybe on a cooldown or after a successful dodge, parry, or some other interaction, you can press your dodge again during a roll to increase your invincibility window or maybe even maneuver behind the enemy. I think there is a lot of ample opportunity to increase the capabilities of the player in the Soul series, all while keeping the heart of the game around, which is the commitment to your attacks and actions. But of course, increasing the capabilities of the player comes with the likely amplification of enemy power. But I think this is a good thing and will likely spawn even more interesting interactions between player and enemy. Speaking of new interactions, I think the passives on items are a pretty fun addition. I know they likely only added these because it helps in making every run feel a bit different. It's just kind of how roguelikes work. But even still, I would absolutely love it if From's next game added random modifiers to their items. Or at the very least added special modifiers to certain legendary equipment into the game like they have here. Giving items a chance to roll random modifiers or even a slightly higher stat that you could farm from enemies could add a lot of replayability. I just think it might help to add that fun feeling of gaining power like you might get in Diablo or Path of Exile. Although I know Neo already does this to some extent, so maybe I just need to go play that first instead of asking From to do it. Still, the point is that these could be a lot of fun to play around. Like getting a legendary item with a special jump attack feels awesome, and I think getting more different kinds of modifiers to certain attacks could make the game more dynamic in a fun way. Although I think it could also potentially dumb down the game into your character spamming a single attack like Diablo or Path of Exile. But at the same time, there's already people who do this with the jump attacks in Elden Ring, so I don't think that should scare them off the idea completely. As long as it's designed correctly, like giving the effect a cooldown, I think it should be fine and just make the game more fun. Anyways, most of the passives you can roll on items in NightReign are fairly tame. They usually read something like increase your damage by 10% if two-handing. Despite that, it's still pretty fun to collect 6 weapons and get benefits from them without equipping them. Although there are some more intriguing ones that give you things like FP on hit, adding a damage type to your weapon like poison or fire, or even creating a surge of magma behind you when sprinting. These more unique abilities typically come with the caveat of it must be one of the items you currently have equipped, marked by this little hand icon next to the passive. There's also some really cool effects on weapons that get activated by walking, like creating a storm of stars above you, which has got to be the lamest possible way to activate these relatively interesting effects. These abilities themselves are super fun and could have been way cooler to see with a more interesting way of proccing them. Even random chance on hit would have been better, but it might have been even cooler if instead they put the effect on something like a dagger and made it activate when hitting a boss in the back, or even something like dodging an attack in the last few frames. I feel like From is on the right track with most everything when it comes to what abilities have been added to weapons, but it's just a little off the mark with things like how they happen. Still, the changes in combat make me really excited for the next entry in the Soul series, whether it's Elden Ring 2 or something completely new. It's refreshing to see From change things up in a way that mostly benefits the players and makes the game a lot more fun to play. All that said, when it comes to exploration and the dreaded circular storm, these feel like a step in the wrong direction. But before I get too heated about certain parts of the game, let's first understand how a run of NightReign works. Firstly, you choose a boss to fight, and then you load into the game by yourself or with a group. If you're playing solo, you'll be whichever character you selected within the roundtable hold. Otherwise, you'll see a character select screen before you load, that way you don't have 3 raiders loading into the game together. Or maybe so you can have 3 raiders load in together. Once you've arrived, you spend 3 days in-game. The first 2 are dedicated to running around the map and gearing up, while the third day, if you make it there, is killing the Chosen Night Lord in a special boss room. Every run begins by dropping you off at a location near the edge of the map, and it will always either be right next to a church with rats or a small camp of simple enemies. The benefit of churches in NightReign is the same as it is in Elden Ring. They give you an extra flask, while the camp will guarantee you enough souls to get to level 2. This makes the church far inferior to the camp, because the very first level in NightReign is an incredibly powerful boost. It will give characters like the Wilder nearly 30% increased damage and HP, making this of extreme importance to get as quickly as possible. In comparison, the next few levels don't give you anywhere near as much of an increase to your health and damage. So now my question is, why is the game this way? Because they could have easily made the base stats for each character much closer to what level 2 is, maybe making it only around a 10% increase, which would still make it worth getting but not feel so utterly necessary to get as fast as possible. Maybe this issue only exists because they were trying to make Soul Level 1 challenge runs more difficult, but no matter the reason, it feels like a strange choice. And with that in mind, I think they should have removed the church start completely, or made it so the rats inside always give you enough runes to hit level 2. Leaving it as a special start you might only get every now and then. If that were the case, I think it would be completely fine. But as it is now, it's very annoying to get a church start. And this is just the beginning when it comes to the issues I have with how NightReign functions. My most disliked mechanic in NightReign is this godforsaken Fortnite Storm Circle. It works just the same as it does in any battle royale. A certain amount of time passes and then the circle starts to close in, forcing you to play within the newly designated area. Let me first say that this is not inherently a bad game mechanic. The purpose of the storm in a battle royale is to force players into a smaller arena so they can eventually find and interact with each other. Without the storm, games would last for ages, with players looking everywhere for each other. It would make for a much more miserable experience. Which makes me wonder what the heck does FromSoft think the purpose of their Storm Circle is, because I cannot for the life of me understand why From wanted to force players into a specific space in a PvE game. But I'll try my best to understand From's potential thought process. For one, it's possible they wanted to make sure players in a random group were actually playing together. There's a few reasons why a group may split up during a run, but it's hardly ever a good idea. Because going your separate ways to do totally different objectives is a horribly inefficient way to gather power in this game. So it might be possible that this circle exists because FromSoft was terrified of people employing this strategy, and they tried to force people to eventually group up no matter what. But it's tough for me to believe this is the case. For one, the game is surprisingly well designed and balanced around a 3-person squad, and combining your efforts is almost always going to be the most efficient way to get stronger. After a couple runs, this becomes incredibly obvious, and you'll almost always try to keep the group together no matter what. This is all to say, I don't think the circle's purpose is a way to force the group to be in the same area. The way the game is designed and balanced already does that without the circle. So the next possible reason for the first circle existing is a way to force you towards the final night boss. There are 2 instances of the circle closing. The first restricts the play area by about half, while the second one is a very small arena where a boss will spawn. And after this boss is defeated is when day 2 will start, where you will do more of the same. And after day 2 you'll be sent to the final boss area. I think this second circle is a good way to put players into a boss arena. In fact, if the days included only this second tiny circle closure, I don't think I would be complaining at all. It's really only the first circle I have a problem with, because this second circle does serve a purpose of keeping the players confined to an area to fight a boss in without a time limit. For example, if instead the boss just spawned after a certain amount of time in whatever area you were currently in, it might happen at a terribly inopportune time, such as while fighting another boss. And I imagine From wanted to avoid this problem as much as possible, and thus made the designated boss area. It also stops players from trying to be crazy efficient by running around the map and killing other bosses while trying to take down the night boss. While this could be solved by putting a time limit on the night boss, I don't think that's a good idea, and luckily From agreed. So it's probably the case that From thought the first circle made getting to the second circle a bit less hectic or strange, because if the second circle spawned on the opposite side of the map from where you were, it would be pretty annoying to get to, but at the same time this is a pretty easy problem to solve. Most of the map variations have many different spots where the final circle can be, meaning they can just make it be whichever one you are closest to, and you'll always be somewhat near a potential end circle location. I think this would have made for a much better overall player experience when traversing the map. As the game is now, the first circle mostly prohibits and constrains decision making instead of making it more interesting. For instance, consider fighting a boss at the edge of the map before the first circle. If you're unlucky, the circle might spawn as far away from you as possible. This gives you 2 choices. Pray you can finish the boss fast enough, or give up and take the safe bet of running to the circle, losing a ton of progress and potential souls in the process. Now yes, this can be avoided by making better decisions around the mechanics given to you, such as choosing to go to a spot more towards the middle or somewhere not so close to the edge. But I don't think this kind of decision making is fun to do. It feels prohibitive. I think a much more interesting choice is something like, should we fight this super hard boss on the edge of the map and risk losing a ton of time, or do we look for something easier to do? Instead, you're left with a decision of, do we risk trying to do this and the circle spawns on us while we do it, or do we go somewhere else? This kind of decision feels much worse to make. It's taking a risk that's out of your control, and it's almost never one you should take, because for some reason, dying is even more punishing in this game than your typical Souls-like, especially if you die in a storm. When you die, not only do you lose all your souls, but you also lose an entire level. Although the level is not completely lost, and if you retrieve your souls, you'll get back whatever you had plus the cost of the level. Still, you can easily get into situations where you get stuck in a storm, and your souls just become lost and unretrievable, which sucks. Another frustrating thing about the storm is getting trapped on the same side of the map for an entire day, or even both days. For example, let's say the group decides to explore the area closest to them. This situation is pretty common, as it just makes sense to go to the places that are nearby versus traversing the entire map to go to a camp. But something really annoying that happens more often than I would like is that the first circle will enclose on the area you've already been exploring, limiting your options of what you can do even further. This could have been solved by just making it so the circle always spawns on the other side of the map from where the game starts you, ensuring you have a chance to explore both halves. But I also don't think this is a very good solution. I think it would make the game feel a little too predictable and make runs feel too similar. Although this already happens with the different map variants, where the first and second circle are always in the same locations for day 2. So if you get a map with a special location, the first circle will always close in on that place. For example, on day 2 of the lava map, the circle will always close in on the volcano, and then the second will always be just north of it. Although this isn't necessarily a bad situation because these are typically the places you want to go to get the most power, but still I think it should be an option because maybe it's not always best to go to the volcano, or maybe your group just doesn't want to. Something else I should mention is that every Night Lord you can face has a weakness to an element, either fire, holy, lightning, or poison. Something I do like about the map is that certain camps are created with these elements in mind. There are cathedrals that are specifically themed around holy, neutral, or fire and will have a corresponding symbol over them on the map. So if you choose the sentient pest boss, who is weak to fire, you might want to try and find a fire cathedral. But this too can be very annoyingly left up to RNG. For example, sometimes an element just won't be on the map. You might be trying to take down the Gaping Jaw, who is weak to poison, but when you load into the map, you might be completely let down when there isn't a single poison camp on the entire map. This can feel horrible. Don't get me wrong, I like that bosses have weaknesses. I think it's a cool interaction, and I'll talk about it more later. But I feel like if you're going to include weaknesses, there should be, at the very least, one camp that drops the element your chosen boss is weak to. Now, even worse, you could be on your way to the only camp that has the element you want, and then suddenly the circle appears on the complete opposite side of the map, leaving you with a horrible choice of risk doing this or to be incredibly inefficient by traversing the entire map once again to come back here later. Or in some cases, just abandon it completely because it's too out of the way. Now, one way to make the circle feel a lot better without completely removing it would be to show where it will end up at the beginning of a run. This could create a lot more interesting decision making around which camps you want to try and get to before it closes. It would also help a lot with making decisions on how to path and if you want to do a boss on the edge of the map. Although considering how bad the communication system is, it might be a pretty useless inclusion for random groups, but it would still be a much appreciated addition. I know I've been laboring this point a lot, but it's just because it's true. Removing the first storm, or at the very least showing its location at the start, would help alleviate so many of the annoyances in NightReign. I get that Souls games are meant to be a frustrating experience, but they are usually in ways that are more interesting to play around. It just feels frustrating for the sake of it alone, and simply, I think that's bad. The aspect of the Souls series that tends to get the most attention is combat, but this might be the weakest part of the Souls experience. While it did spawn an entire genre for how unique it is, it's not the reason for its success. The Souls series has always excelled the most when it comes to world building, whether it's exploring and uncovering the secrets of a forgotten ruin, or meeting intriguing characters and slaying terrifying demons. These familiar but distant worlds are what make games like Elden Ring so attractive, and I believe that this is the reason why most other games that attempt to imitate FromSoft have trouble replicating their success. They just don't come anywhere close to being as interesting or fun to explore. On top of that, I think half the reason we put up with this often frustrating combat experience is to delve deeper into these worlds and uncover what's there, while the other half, of course, is to overcome a tough but satisfying challenge. This is all to say that NightReign feels pretty bland in its world when compared to its predecessors. A large part of this is simply due to the design of the maps themselves, but not entirely. For one, being on a timer just inherently makes players avoid exploring a world and looking for secrets in the same way they might in Elden Ring. Instead, most are just trying to be as efficient as possible and attempting to get a high level before fighting the boss. I'm not sure being on a timer for these kinds of games is something that most people enjoy. Even with the changes to account for it, I think I would have had more fun without a time limit. I do think being on a limited time can be a fun experience, but it's usually when I'm comfortable enough with the game and trying to push myself to new limits. But the Souls series is typically not that kind of game for me. I like taking my time to choose my stats and make a build that works around an item I found. I want to look around and explore, or sometimes I just want to bash my head against a boss 100 times until I finally take him down. Neither of these are feelings that really exist in NightReign. Instead, I feel a constant pressure that I'm fighting against a clock to get enough souls and a fun item. The largest reason the time limit exists at all is 1, making sure groups don't have to spend forever together in a game, and 2, the way the map is designed. I'm not exactly sure which of these came first, but either way, I think a much more fun experience would have been something more akin to a dungeon crawler, or even something like Hades, where you would go from room to room without a time limit and then make choices for which path to take next. Although this is a game I think I would like more, it's not necessarily an actual problem with the game. Rather, it's just something I don't like about it. Removing the timer wouldn't solve any of the fundamental issues that NightReign has, because what really holds this game back more than anything else as a roguelike is that it doesn't feel like it has enough impactful choices. It doesn't take very long for each playthrough of NightReign to run together and feel much of the same. While the combat is fun, the replayability feels low, which is not a good sign for a roguelike. There's just not enough variance in the items, passive choices, and map exploration. When I reminisce on roguelikes I love, like Hades 2, I think about the important choices I made in every single run that impacted my gameplay. It wasn't just a few choices either, but nearly every single one of them. Whether it was choosing a new boon, weapon upgrade, or even a path I was taking, every single choice felt vital in order to get strong and win the run. NightReign doesn't have this feeling for me. Runs feel a bit too formulaic, partly because there's not a lot of interesting choices. Not just in the paths you take, but also in the items you choose or the upgrades you get. One part of this problem is that many upgrades feel pretty useless, while just a few don't. For example, after defeating a boss as the bow character, I might get offered 3 different options: increase my maximum FP, make my sorcery and incantation stronger, or periodical giant glint blades. The choice here is obvious because there really isn't one. You would always choose the giant glint blades because the other 2 are completely useless to you. And I should mention, this is getting lucky. Usually these drops offer rewards that are completely useless to you, and it doesn't even matter what you pick. This is not a feeling I remember when playing some of my favorite roguelikes, whether it's Hades, Slay the Spire, or more recently He Is Coming. Even though in something like Hades, the enemies, bosses, and general layouts are pretty similar, there's a certain magic here that makes everything feel different each time. And that magic is simply that each choice you make has weight. The choices you make will significantly alter the way you play the game, meaning how you pilot your character varies almost every single time you load in, even when using the same weapon. This is simply because most of the choices given to you in Hades is deciding between different core abilities and then giving those abilities new effects, which changes how you will use them in conjunction with your other abilities. For example, you might find an upgrade to your axe that makes you charge attacks 40% faster, and then you might be able to find an ability that causes your charge attacks to send out a wave of destruction. Or you can even find upgrades that interact between abilities, such as putting a rune on the ground and hitting it with a charge attack to make lightning rain down in that spot. Not only are these cool choices you can make, but these interactions are super fun and change how you will play the game. Nothing comes close to this feeling in NightReign. Usually your gameplay stays mostly the same almost no matter what items you end up rolling. The most you can hope for is finding a legendary weapon of the preferred type for whichever character you're playing, or one that has an element the boss is weak to. And if you're lucky, it'll be both, like getting a legendary sword that adds a lightning effect to your strong jump attack while fighting the horse and playing the wilder. But this is a fairly rare situation. I think this kind of thing is awesome, but I really wish FromSoft would have leaned into this idea even further, such as getting something like the passive in Hades that makes your strong attacks charge 40% faster. Not only would it make it more fun to use charge attacks and also make it so you can press them at times when you normally couldn't, it would combine very well with certain weapon effects, such as Godfrey's Axe, which has an effect that creates an explosion on your charge attack. This could have been a crazy fun combo to get during a run. Yeah, it would be broken, but getting a strong combination like this is a really fun moment that you should want players to have in a roguelike, as long as you can't make it guaranteed to happen every run. Ultimately, getting presented with more choices that would alter how your character functions would have only made the game more fun, like getting an extra use of your hookshot, or getting a follow-up of fire after using it, or spreading fire on the ground when you cast an ultimate. Strangely, these kind of game-altering passives do exist in NightReign, just not within the run itself. The way you can change your abilities is through a system called Relics. After each run, you'll be rewarded with a bunch of these stones that each have their own randomly rolled modifiers, as well as a currency to buy more of these and many other things. In total, you can equip up to 3 relics that will have 1 to 3 modifiers of varying power. Some can be as simple as giving you more weapon attack and stats, which might be as little as a 2% damage increase, while some will significantly change a character ability, giving a huge increase in power. Changes can be things like causing your ability to occur after finishing a chain attack, adding an element like poison to it, or giving you multiple charges of your ability. While I do think the modifiers in the system are cool, I feel like these decisions would have been far more suited to be made inside of a run, because when playing a roguelike, I highly desire and value variance, and this would help a lot with that, making each playthrough feel much more different than the last. Although I should mention that it doesn't bother me that these kinds of systems exist outside of the game. In fact, many roguelikes, including Hades, does this. The real annoyance comes from the fact that the system is the only place where you can significantly change how it feels to play the game. If there were more ability-altering choices within the game itself, I wouldn't have a problem with these at all, even if they were the exact same choices that could be doubled up on. This alone would give the much-needed variance NightReign needs, but From could have gone even further, because there's another layer to how your gameplay can change the relics. They can change how you explore and path. For instance, there's a relic modifier that says for each Everjail boss defeated, gain attack power, which basically means if you fight a bunch of Everjail bosses, you'll get very strong. I think this is great, it totally changes the gameplay loop. Because with this enabled, it would now be a really good idea to go to camps that have keys and try to do as many Everjails as possible, which is something you probably wouldn't normally do. But again, it's the same problem. It's something you decide on outside of the game instead of while playing it. But changing how you explore before entering the game is even more problematic. For one, choosing a relic such as this likely means on giving up on a more fun relic that alters how your character ability works, and I don't think that's a great choice to make. Secondly, and much more importantly, this is a 3-person game where grouping up and doing everything together is the best way to make progress, so making a choice that will significantly alter the way you want to explore the world before you even start playing is likely to make it so everyone isn't on the same page, creating unnecessary strife within the group. Not to mention, this game has a horrible communication system, making this situation even worse. A better way to have included this modifier to exploration would have been to make it something that happens after a random event. That way everyone can be on the same page when it happens. Plus, again, it's just better for variance. But annoyingly, they already have events like this in-game. For example, Margit can suddenly spawn on your group and start fighting you out of nowhere. And once you defeat him, he'll give you a passive that increases your attack power for each site of grace visited. I think this is a fantastic in-game event. It gives the group a new common goal and changes the gameplay loop significantly. Again, normally it's stupidly inefficient to split up, but with this buff it's actually incredibly strong for the group to run around and find as many of these graces across the map as possible. The only sad part about this is that of the few events that do exist, this is the only one that is fun to get and changes the way you play the game in a good way. Other events are things that are much more simple, like a locust swarm that you have to follow to its queen and kill, or a hooded goatman that will show up and take away some of your HP until you go to his map marker. These don't really alter your gameplay in a way that's as significant and fun as the market one, and they also seem to happen very infrequently. I got maybe one of these events every 1 in 7 games or so. Now these do give some nice buffs as a reward, like more runes, making your flask heal FP and HP, or just getting more stats. But again, it's nothing that significantly changes your gameplay. Now I don't think everything needs to be a choice that will change how you play the game. In fact, sometimes getting a stat buff is just what you need to get strong enough or even change to a new build you want to use. So while I like what the relics do, I feel as if they were misplaced. I think these could have been a good system if they didn't feel so impactful compared to the choices you do make inside of the game. And what makes this even worse is that playing the game without relics now feels pretty horrible. So overall, relics are a miss for me, but it is close to being something good. My final takeaway here is that it seems like From wasn't exactly sure what they wanted NightReign to be. While I've been sort of referring to NightReign this entire time as a roguelike, I'm not even sure that it fits the category, because it sort of ended up in this awkward crossroads between two different genres, an RPG like Elden Ring and a roguelike. While a roguelike can be an RPG in many ways, what typically sets these genres apart is where your most important choices are made. In an RPG, you've usually got a plan. You might want to be a warrior of sorts, and you will place your stats into whatever bucket you think is most suitable to make that happen. While in a roguelike, your choices are much more on the fly. Sure, in many roguelikes, there might be a few builds or abilities that you already have in mind as you begin a run, but they won't always come. And typically, that's the fun part, where you can try to adapt your build and make do with what choices ended up being thrown your way. In a more generic RPG, you don't have to adapt to anything. You can usually just throw yourself at a challenge using whatever setup you prefer as many times as you'd like, while in a roguelike, part of the challenge is that your chances are limited, and you have to make the most of it with what you have. You're never guaranteed a certain build or playstyle, and you'll sometimes just have to scrape something together. The problem in NightReign, again, is that it places its most important choices for building your character before the game even loads, which is what creates this confusing mismatch. It's like if I could jump into a Slay the Spire run with half of my deck already built. And ultimately, I think having this impactful of a choice that you can choose every single time before the game starts takes away too much of that roguelike feeling. This, of course, doesn't mean a roguelike can't be anything like an RPG. There are many great roguelikes that include RPG elements, like, again, Slay the Spire, where you can choose a class like Ironclad, Silent, Watcher, or Defect. And despite choosing a class, there's still a ton of variance in how these characters will play. Each have their own subclasses that can be formed and made while creating your deck within a run. The difference in NightReign is that each character will almost always play exactly the same as they did in the previous run. There's just not enough variance because, again, each class lacks their own set of impactful choices within the game. So even if NightReign is not trying to be a roguelike, I feel like it should have been, because the predictability of each run makes the next one more dull than the last. So the reason why NightReign should be more of a roguelike is that this exact issue has already been solved by the most popular roguelikes, and is why the genre exists. It's why they put their most important choices within the run itself and not before you start one. It makes each playthrough feel fresh and new for a long time. Next up on the list of things NightReign is close to doing well but doesn't already merchants. Talking to these guys, much like in Elden Ring, will allow you to purchase various consumables and weapons. I like how the shop is the same across the entire map and how you can find them in many different locations. I think it's a good implementation of this common trope in roguelikes. Except for one thing, which is that you must use the same currency to buy items that you use to level up. This is another decision that is not fun or interesting, as it is probably 95% of the time just better to save your runes and level up. I mean it when I say I probably only bought from the shop 5 or so times out of my 100 plus runs. Not including the very final shop, of course, but this is basically a completely different system. This annoying choice between choosing to spend runes or not could have been easily alleviated by giving you a separate currency just for shopping. Maybe it could drop from defeating bosses that roam around the map. I think this would have been a much more interesting thing to play around. For example, you could check a shop early on to see if there's any items you want, and then that might influence your decisions around how many bosses you would like to fight. But most of all, a separate currency would just make the decision to buy something feel less bad. All in all, NightReign is so close to creating a fun and replayable roguelike. They have all the right stuff here in the game already, it's just not placed in the right spots. Really, I think FromSoft was so close to making this game so much better, but they just barely missed the mark. And ultimately, it feels like NightReign is stuck in a tug-of-war between trying to be Elden Ring or a roguelike, and doesn't find a solid identity as either of them. Something else missing from NightReign are the more difficult roguelike bosses that make me want to find a strong build and demolish them with it. Oftentimes in a roguelike, much of the mastery of the game comes from understanding the choices given to you and then choosing a path that will best lead you towards taking down the boss. Whether it's by getting the bare minimum requirements to do it or creating the ultimate build, this is not a feeling I get in NightReign. Once you understand how to play the game, it becomes almost tough to lose a run. Although I do think this kind of thing is fine if it takes an exceptional amount of skill and time to achieve this level of play, but most of the time winning a run in NightReign feels pretty brain dead. It's really easy. Although I found the bosses a little on the weak side, they're still fun to fight, and of course they come with the now expected FromSoft spectacle. So with a little added difficulty, like giving them more HP, I could easily see myself fighting these bosses over and over again. Unfortunately, that's not really possible in this game, and I really wish it was, because I think these bosses are, for the most part, some of the best I've seen from the Souls series. The very first Night Lord everyone must slay before you can fight the rest of them is this 3-headed dog. I think this boss is a lot of fun. Its attacks feel fair to dodge, they're readable, and there are plenty of punish windows for each class to shine in. I also really like the giant chainsword attack. For one, it's just cool, but it's also a great attack for a multiplayer scenario, where everyone has to look out for it because of how wide its range is. This is a common theme across many of the bosses. There are a lot of attacks that are huge and take up a lot of the play area instead of just the person currently being targeted, making it tough for just one person to completely carry the run. But of course, one person can just carry by being the only one alive and winning. Still, the point is that bosses are clearly designed to interact with more than just their target. This is further exemplified by Gladius when he splits into 3 different dogs, one for everyone. My group's first instinct was to try and split their attention, so everyone attacked a dog, and well, it went about as well as you might expect, horribly. But it was still a lot of fun and created the kind of chaos that I hope to see in these kinds of fights with more people involved. Although sometimes fighting in a group can be a bit of a drag, mostly because the boss's target can change so frantically that it feels like you end up spending half your time chasing the boss around this giant arena rather than actually fighting it. It's not so bad on this boss, but on some others it can get pretty egregious. Something that adds to this frenzy that I failed to mention until now is that you can revive your friends during a fight, which is done by using any attack until this purple stamina bar is depleted. This addition makes perfect sense in this kind of game, and I like it a lot. Although at first it felt pretty awkward to use an attack to revive a player, it slowly started to feel natural. I think the idea of trading potential damage against a boss to instead bring a player back to life feels pretty fair, as well as the increase in the amount of damage needed to revive a player for each time they've died that night. Back to talking about the bosses, one that I didn't really like at first but quickly became a favorite after just a few more runs is the Centaur Horseman guy. Learning what attacks can be jumped and where I can safely position myself in melee made all the difference. After feeling all of this out, the fight has a really nice flow to it, and something else that made this fight feel a lot better was learning when to hit him with his weakness. Doing this at the right moment will interrupt his most disruptive attack, which will make the ground erupt with holy spears that are difficult to dodge. And what's even better is that this attack is interruptible even if you don't have lightning. You can try to stagger him before it goes off, or just simply hit him with an ultimate during this attack, and I think that's really fun. Beyond that, every boss has the typical phase 2 change where they start to go a bit crazy with an increase in difficulty. From takes this even further with a few super bosses where they begin the fight in their phase 2 frenzy and then have an even more chaotic and difficult phase 3. These are a super fun challenge to take on, and the Horseman is one of them. In his second phase, he grows these weird tentacles that splash goo everywhere. And then for some reason, his third phase gives him a giant Darth Maul-like lightsaber where he will go absolutely ballistic with it. And last but not least, he gets a bow. He'll leap 100 feet into the air and just shoot a Radon-like meteor attack at a targeted player. Except all these attacks are surprisingly readable and fun to play around. It makes me think that Consort Radon could have looked a bit more like this, and I wouldn't have hated it so much. In fact, many attacks have become much more readable in NightReign. I especially like that they've added this purple glow to grabs. It makes them stand out a lot more, and they even give you a big benefit when you correctly dodge them. This is something players have been begging for, and I love this solution. It's yet another idea that I hope they push even further and make more changes like this. Another clarity they've added makes it much more obvious as to who the boss's current target is, which is shown by a red circle appearing on the player. When this happens, the boss will perform attacks that focus that player until their onslaught is over. This is great because the frantic target swapping bosses often do will make fights much more difficult with more players or summons involved, just because of how unpredictable bosses will become. Having this feature where you know who a boss will be focused on for a portion of time is a very nice change. Overall, I find that combat in NightReign is a giant leap in the right direction for the Souls series. To labor this point a little more, just imagine how much better it would feel to play Elden Ring with some of these changes like the character abilities. So I can't wait to see how From pushes these ideas even further. Although, as for being a roguelike, I think the game takes a few too many wrong turns. But despite their failures here, I think From could learn from this and make another roguelike in the future that would be much more successful. Because there are a lot of great ideas here, they just need to be implemented in a slightly different way. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.